In the 1980s, sales of diamonds, champagne, and American stock shot up. Being an investment banker suddenly became cool, and an expensive, mean-spirited drug began to fuel the work and play of the rich. An age of excess needed a music of excess. Heavy metal stepped up to meet the challenge. Heavy metal, bro! With grandiose stage shows, amped-up guitar solos, and offstage troublemaking, metal rockers suited the mood of the decade, almost too well. The perception of metal bands, the decadence, and the backstage parties, and the sex and the drugs and rock and roll is pretty much all true. Before long, metal moved to the forefront of pop music. But when the era of excess came to a close, metal's popularity ended with it. Become pantomime, it become Liberace, and it's a shame, really, because it didn't start off that way. At the dawn of the decade, heavy metal was on the verge of becoming irrelevant. Drug problems and revolving lineups had sidelined many hard rock acts of the 70s. And the energy and commitment of punk made heavy metal's gothic posturing seem archaic. Punk's stripped-down sound influenced what was being called the new wave of British heavy metal, by groups like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, and Motorhead.
There were bands like Motorhead that were able successfully early on to combine the best aspects of heavy metal with the best aspects of punk rock.
They were like the first hard rock heavy metal band that it was okay for the punks to like. Like you could be a punk rock guy with a Motorhead patch on the back of your jacket.
But the new wave of British metal was largely ignored by American audiences, who favored more accessible rock acts like Foreigner and Journey.
I think that people looked at metal as a threat. What is this loud, abrasive, obnoxious music with these big, heavy riffs and, strange, evil language? What does it mean?
In 1980, the pioneers of metal, Led Zeppelin, announced dates for a U.S. tour. Venues were booked and tickets went on sale, but the tour never happened. On September 25th, drummer John Bonham died after a night of heavy drinking. Within weeks, Zeppelin
When John Bonham passed away, what I think was the most heartbreaking thing about as a fan of their music was that I would never see the original lineup play. And for a fan like me who has everything Zeppelin has ever made, created, written, it was devastating.
In 1980, another hard rock band lost a key member when ACDC's lead singer Bon Scott died of substance abuse. But instead of calling it quits, ACDC replaced Scott with Brian Johnson, recorded their multi-platinum selling album Back in Black.
AC/DC was one of those bands that just turned me on. Like, if you put on an AC/DC record and it hit a certain nerve in me, that's indescribable. Angus Young and his very spoiled attitude imagery with the schoolboy uniform, his brother holding down a very serious rhythm guitar, and the song's fantastic, and they were all about sexual innuendo.
But the band who created the model for heavy metal success in the 80s was Van Halen.
Girl, you really got it now. You got me started, don't know what you will.
Van Halen doesn't play heavy metal. Van Halen plays what we call big rock. The Los Angeles Quartet became one of rock's most popular bands in the late 70s. But in the 80s, their mix of complex instrumentation and over-the-top theatrics re-energized American hard rock.
Van Halen were amazing. They showed you that you could be technically proficient and energetic and showy all in one. David Lee Roth is one of the few frontmen that I personally think is worth his song.
David Lee Roth epitomized the front man with sheer, uninhibited attitude while not offending anybody.
True rock and roll should have no perimeters to it. It should have no, you can only go this far. You can only talk about this and that kind of thing. I'm not interested. For me, this is just one big wet t-shirt contest.
Along comes Eddie Van Halen, smiling, sliding, spinning, flying, and reinventing the guitar.
He's one of the best guitar players in the world. And he had his own style, very busy style. His sense of tapping started that whole school.
Beats told me to tell y'all about their new earbuds. They're called Beat Studio Buds. They have active noise cancellation.
As Van Halen was redefining the way heavy metal could be played, they were also raising the bar for living large, earning a reputation for their notorious backstage anthem.
During the concert, David Lee Roth claims to be actively searching out girls from the stage. When he spots a girl in the audience he thinks is cute, he dances over to the side of the stage while Eddie takes a guitar solo. Oh, this is pitiful. There he will shout something to an available roadie like red right, red t-shirt, out of sight, 6 feet back. While David dances back to the microphone, a roadie in the front row will receive a radio communique from the stage. Then he will go to work to find the girl and give her a pass. Now, is there a hint of truth anywhere in this?
Well, you want to interact with the audience as closely as possible. Music is a sharing experience.
Van Halen's success shifted the heavy metal capital of the world from the UK to Southern California. The bands that would come out of the Los Angeles club scene made metal's unapologetically trashy style seem more fun than dangerous. And the bands also forced the world to accept a new icon of 80s manhood, the guy with makeup, tight pants, and big hair. When we return, rock fans want their metal.
It's a force that we all gather together. We will rule forever, no matter what.
And hard rockers get a glam makeover. When VH1 presents the 80s continues.
At the start of the 80s, heavy metal's biggest fans were those guys a lot of us knew in high school. The ones who hung out in the bathroom that everyone called burnouts. Well, all of that was about to change. By mid-decade, metal had developed huge crossover appeal, and metalheads were finally out in the open.
Hi. Take the television. Place it against your body. Feel the sound of my voice. I'm Diamond David Lee Roth, here at the US Festival.
By 1983, heavy metal emerged from the underground. That year, Apple Computers sponsored the 4-day US Festival. Featuring David Bowie, The Clash, and The Pretenders, the event attracted many of the era's most popular bands. But it was the festival's day devoted to heavy metal that drew the largest crowds.
1, 2, 3!
There were so many people you couldn't see where it ended. It was just mountains of people. The crowds at the US Festival only confirmed the size and dedication of metal's audience. In the 80s, metal bands sold millions of albums without radio play. Metal's core support came from fiercely loyal working class guys who turned to the music to burn off anger and party hard.
Heavy metal rules!
I don't think any form of music expressed the anger and frustration of growing up the way heavy metal bands did.
Just gets your aggression out, really gets you going. The most exciting form of music to me, the hard rock and beat.
Heavy metal is popular because it reaches a certain frequency in people that only that sound can ignite in you. Once you get infected with it, it'll never leave you. I hit
headbanger is somebody who dies for his music, who was a true rivet head. A headbanger is someone that drives by in their car and goes, "Metal, Steve! Metal!"
Heavy metal is, it's what they live for. They work all day to save all their money so they can go to the festivals and buy the CDs and kick back at night and drink a beer and bang their head. That's life.
It's like so mystical, and it's a force that we all gather together and we'll rule forever no matter what. Everybody's saying,
Not getting enough
why do you have long hair? Why do you have long hair? It's like, because we live it. Long hair is
not a
it.
hippie thing.
It's not like, it's like, you should have short hair because you can get a better job. You, man.
There's a form of escapism that they can relate to. You know, they can escape to the music. They can escape to the concerts. They can get out of their life. Maybe they don't. All fans don't live in Los Angeles, New York, Chicago. Mostly fans are in smaller towns, suburbia. And when you come to town, it gives them a great release.
Since new metal bands had a tough time breaking onto pop radio, they relied on live shows to build a following. But before long, there was a new way for hard rockers to find an audience.
This is Kevin DeBro of Quiet Riot. Make sure you catch all our decibels in stereo on MTV Music Television.
There's a lot of bands that became popular in the 80s that perhaps wouldn't have been popular had there not been MTV, because MTV was playing bands that radio probably would not have played, and they gave us a huge
When people heard that come on Feel the Noise, it was like, wow, that was a pop metal song. And it was as pop as it gets. And then everyone said, wow, you can be heavy and still come across to a lot of people. Once that happened, it really opened up the floodgates.
Music video made superstars visually arresting, often androgynous pop artists. In the early 80s, a group of metal bands conformed to this agenda perfectly. With makeup and outrageous clothes, bands like Twisted Sister, Rat, and Motley Crue became the pioneers of glam metal.
There were all these kind of heavy metal drag queens. Suddenly it moved into rock as well, and they sort of got into the gear and got into the look and adopted the stance. People always copy.
We really look really weird. I mean, weirder than 80s bands look. We look weirder than that. And he is famous for saying this about himself, that he looked like Bette Midler on acid. That was Keith's quote.
I was a fan of glam rock, but I was also a serious headbanger. When I joined Twisted in '76, I brought my arsenal of not only glam records, but Judas Priest, AC/DC, Ozzy Osbourne, and I sort of introduced that element to the glam music. And then by the 80s, the glam metal movement had really kicked in.
Motley Crue, they followed Twisted Sister with the glam thing, and they dressed up like a little bit, kind of like Kiss meets the New York Dolls.
I'm rolling free, a little bit better than it used to be, 'cause I'm of all the realms of that type of music, I would have to say Motley Crue were by far the best, I think, because their attitude to me was much harder and much tougher.
We're a street rock and roll band. We've always tended towards more of the glam than the heavy metal.
I mean, also visually, we're obviously glam group.
The glam bands brought metal to a larger audience. Leppard's had metal popularity to even greater heights. A lot of the stuff that was big in very early 80s were the so-called rock bands. I mean, I love Journey. I think they're great, but I could see why people were getting a little bored of it. And that's really what we kind of set out to do. Destroy all that stuff that was there and just make a new version of it.
So then I said to him, you ought to customize your car insurance at Liberty Mutual. You only pay for what you need.
They've got elements of pop in their rock music that could be really tough or that could be really sweet. Just a combination of, I think, of a lot of different elements that just struck the American ear and made them very appealing.
Def Leppard formed out of Sheffield, England in the late 70s. While they initially sounded like a Led Zeppelin knockoff, the band found their voice in 1983 when they hooked up with legendary producer Mutt Lange for their album Pyromania. It was Star Wars for the ears. That was the whole thing. We used technology to the hill. You know, we did things that most rock bands wouldn't do. In 1983, Def Leppard put hard rock near the top of the pop chart, as Pyromania rivaled Michael Jackson's Thriller in sales. Seeing it, you know, next to Michael Jackson's Thriller was like just such a buzz. It was unreal. Yeah, for 6 months, 6 friggin' months, we couldn't get rid of him.
They broke mega ground. I mean, there are so many albums that come out that just changed the face of rock and roll. Pyromania was one of those albums.
The enormous success of Pyromania put the band in an indefinable musical category, in between pop and metal.
We were more than just a standard heavy metal band, if you like. We transcended that initial little box to become pop stars, in a sense, which was very alien, really, because we were more into the rock and roll aspect.
In the mid-'80s, the glam bands and Def Leppard made heavy metal accessible, maybe too accessible. When a large audience started tuning into the music, metal encountered an unexpected enemy: parents. Coming up, moms take aim at metal.
Just last week, a young man took his life while listening to the music of AC/DC.
And hard rockers show their soft side. When VH1 presents the 80s continues.
Kids having too good of a time has always been the target of parents. And as heavy metal's popularity and influence grew, a small but influential group of parents made it their business to crack down on the music and its fans.
This is the future of the hard rock.
Not everyone loved heavy metal. The people who hated it really hated it. Parents in particular were outraged.
You sit in here all day and play that sick, repulsive, electric twanger? Who are you? What do you want to do with your life?
I want to rock. Parents have traditionally found heavy metal bands to be repugnant. And I think it's partially because they've usually found the animosity and the anger and hostility partially directed toward them.
You can't stop rock and roll. You can't stop rock and roll.
Back in Control is an organization that is designed to show parents how to regain control of a child's behavior.
Okay, turn around there. Go ahead, fill me up.
What do you want me to do? Bend over? One of the things that we have found, which we call demettaling, is a program that actually gets the kid out of heavy metal.
Wait a minute.
We have certain rules. Removal of heavy metal albums or tapes, not allowing the child to dress in any style of heavy metal, which would mean taking these kinds of things away from him, not allowing him to wear the heavy metal t-shirts that depict the band members with pictures of monsters or skeletons or whatever, graves on them.
As metal spread from burnt-out kids to mainstream football rallies and keg parties, upper-class parents got nervous. In 1985, the Parents Music Resource Center was formed, led by Tipper Gore, wife of then Senator Al Gore.
The Parents Music Resource Center is a nonprofit educational organization that exists to raise awareness about graphic content in some of the entertainment.
In September of 1985, the PMRC received a Senate hearing to discuss explicit content in music. Artists like Prince and Madonna were targeted, but the focus of the hearing was heavy metal.
I think it was just a combination of the fierceness of the music, the look of the band, some of the things that early bands doubled, and I think that that's because there was puritanical spirit that runs in this country.
During the hearings, heavy metal was denounced as the cause of sexual perversion, Satanism, and suicide.
Ozzy Osbourne sings Suicide Solution. Blue Oyster Cult sings Don't Fear the Reaper. AC/DC sings Shoot to Thrill. Just last week, in Center Point, a small Texas town, a young man took his life while listening to the music of AC/DC.
The hearings resulted in voluntary labeling of albums deemed explicit, but the condemnation of heavy metal by the PMRC only enhanced the music's rebellious image.
I don't care what they say. I don't care if they put stickers on all my records. They can blank them out altogether if they want. They can burn me at the stake if they want to burn a bloody witch. They won't stop me. I'll come back and haunt them.
Heavy metal's status as the music of alienated teenage guys was challenged in the last half of the 80s. The next wave of metal bands would combine the intensity of metal with the romantic sincerity.
I remember Sebastian Bach said, what's with Bon Jovi and all those teeth? You know, he said, there's no smiling in heavy metal. What is it, happy metal?
What had traditionally been the music of disaffected teenage boys was now attracting younger fans, older fans, and many more female fans.
See, because of the image, there'd be a lot of women that would come to see us. We were probably one of the premier women bands. I mean, you go to one of our shows and, damn, that was some nice looking. A lot of women came to see it.
Bon Jovi knew that wearing those cowboy boots and those fringe jackets and with that feathered, bad Valerie Bertinelli hair, they knew that if the girls liked them, that success would follow and that the boys would too. By the time they came out with Wanted Dead or Alive, they had a song even dudes could like. Because they'd seen a million faces and they rocked us off.
The success of Bon Jovi ushered in the era of hair metal.
And we weren't like really glammed out. Like we didn't have white faces and like, we did eye makeup and we looked like chicks.
It definitely was a hair band phenomenon, if you will.
Talk to me. There wasn't enough hairspray as far as I was concerned. You know what I mean?
I remember one time I ran out of eyeliner. I used a magic marker.
Yeah, bad news.
If you look like a girl and you have a beard, that's okay. If you look like a girl and you really look like a girl,
There were dances, there were clothes horses, there were pop tarts, they were having fun, they were dressing up in an extravagant parody of the fashion of the time, and they were just having a blast.
It was like women were women and men were their clothes. And I
helped push metal into the mainstream. But the bands who were most successful also embraced styles traditionally neglected by metal groups: love songs and ballads.
The power ballad thing of the 80s came from bands that were studying other bands that got famous, and it became a formula. It absolutely was. You put out the rock song first to get your AOR bass, and then you did the rock ballad.
Power ballads were heavy enough to attract hard rock fans, but they were pop enough to get metal bands on radio stations that would typically exclude metal.
Every rose has its thorn.
Those ballads, if they're sincere and they're real, really open up your music to a lot of different people that may normally not listen to your music.
In June of 1987, metal bands held 6 of the top 10 spots on Billboard's albums chart. Bands like Bon Jovi and Whitesnake were battling Madonna and U2 for pop supremacy. What was once the music of a small subculture had found mass
You had a whole new slew of radio stations that would play you, and a whole new market of not just record buyers, but also concert goers. Because I think it made a certain group of people feel like, okay, now it's safe to go to a concert. Because before they probably thought it was just a bunch of maniac metalheads, did drugs, alcohol, and fights, and knifings, and shootings.
For many fans, teased hair, eyeliner, and romantic ballads had nothing to do with real heavy metal, and they began to look for true metal somewhere else. Coming up, metal remains its edge, while Guns N' Roses shake it up.
We happened to be in the right place at the right time. The music business needed a shot in the arm like us.
VH1 presents the 80s continues.
In the 80s, metal bands with lipstick and teased hair weren't the only hard rockers attracting an audience. By the later part of the decade, another form of metal was bubbling underground, and it was even faster and louder than its predecessors.
It's fast, it's powerful, it's distorted, it's obnoxious metal. It rules.
By the late 80s, metal's audience had split into 2 main camps. On one side were the fans of bands like Bon Jovi, Poison, and Motley Crue, the acts that made heavy metal the music of pop radio. On the other were fans of speed or thrash metal, bands like Megadeth, Metallica, and Anthrax.
We had our audience, they had their audience. There really wasn't a crossover between the two. We were just elitist, purist. We felt that what we were doing in the 80s was important and real.
They just wrote songs that weren't going to get on the top 40, so I guess that made them not sell out. But we did write songs that got in the top 40, so I guess that sold us out. Fine, I'm sold out. So,
from the LA clubs, the thrash metal scene grew underground through tape trading, word of mouth, and live shows that highlighted the harsh metal sound.
Music, what it's about, the political nature and the lyrics and all the topics that nothing is taboo. That to me is hard rock and heavy metal.
The thing about heavy metal is it ain't good unless it's got bad attitude. And Metallica and Megadeth were both way cool because they had really nasty attitudes.
You had all this big hair, these 80s glam metal bands, and then us, black t-shirts, black pants, and we went out there and we just kicked butt.
Metallica was able to sell millions of albums without the help of radio or music video. Like metal bands of the 70s, they built their audience by touring.
We were always a live band, always. Since day one, that's how we got our fan base. You put a record on, you tour. You put a record out, you tour, you fall over. You put another record out, you just keep getting in people's faces and just pushing what you were doing into their faces to the point of submission, basically. Well, I think 80s metal had a lot of diversity to it. The scene back then was really cool because you would have a difference in all the bands, and I call them the originators, the imitators. Poison was different from Metallica, who was different from Guns N' Roses, who all was considered hard rock or heavy metal. That combination of people, it was the only 5 people that could have made up what turned out to be Guns N' Roses, because we were so arrogant and we were so not into anything that anybody else was doing.
In 1987, something new appeared, the abrasive, keening sound of Guns N' Roses. Graduates of the LA club scene, Guns N' Roses moved hard rock back to center stage with their debut, Appetite for Destruction. The group united fans of hair metal and thrash metal and transcended the heavy metal genre altogether.
When Guns N' Roses came along, it was like, we've got this sexy band that can play the most awesome music and write the most incredible lyrics. Very seldom does that kind of magical combination come along.
We happened to be in the right place at the right time when the music business was in such a way that they needed a shot in the arm like us. We got big, we got really big. Since we were the antithesis of everything else that was going on in the music business, I guess we were the answer.
The band quickly gained a reputation for their excessive behavior, as arrests and tales of drug use surfaced.
That's a real problem to try to, now I'm done with business, now I can go in this room and be psychotic. It's like I have to, balance out, when can I destroy everything around me to when I have to be nice to everybody. Things aren't that cut and dry.
Some music fans who liked the shrill melodies of Guns N' Roses couldn't deal with their rougher edges. The chaos surrounding the band reached a peak in 1988 with the release of the single One in a Million, a song many condemned as racist and homophobic.
We knew going into that song, and putting it out, that there were going to be problems and there would be a lot of closed minds. I mean, there was an apology on the record saying the song was very generic and generalized, which seems to get overlooked.
Despite controversy, Guns N' Roses seemed poised to become the biggest band in rock as the 90s started. But the group went on to release only 2 more albums.
They were so huge. You can become that big and believe it so much that you think you're immune from everything else that goes on in the world, and then they self-destructed.
When we return, metal parties hard and gets a hangover.
And it become just a bunch of happy metal formula bands. It was definitely a disenfranchised audience who wanted that anger and wanted that edge.
When VH1 presents the 80s continues.
By the end of the 80s, junk bondsmen were busted, yuppie spending sprees began to slow, and the depth of the AIDS tragedy was becoming increasingly clear. It all added up to the end of a decade-long love affair with excess. And hard rockers were beginning to feel like the party was winding down.
The era was just based around good times and partying and having a good time and getting drunk and girls.
Heavy metal bands prospered in the overindulgence of the 80s, openly flaunting their appetites for drugs and sex.
We had the bimbo passes, and there'd be girls under the stage during the show. We did some sick shit. It was right out of Hustler magazine.
Drugs were everywhere. Booze everywhere. Women, thank God, everywhere.
There were so many girls, and we would go fishing. We'd just walk in with our fishing poles and just catch one and pop it in and take it behind the rainbow. 15 minutes later, back on the strip.
Everything you read is true and more. Hell yeah, you know. I shag groupies, you know. I mean, it's almost like a healthy thing.
Remember being at the cat house, and I asked them if they had a beer bottle cap. And they said, yeah, they got me one. And I spit in it and poured some cocaine in it, drew some up, and shot up right in front of them. And they flipped out. And I was like, God, what's the problem?
As the decade of excess came to a close, years of fast living and drug abuse started to catch up with many hard rockers. And metal's nothing but a good time image was losing its appeal.
There's a lot of bands went up the ladder, got famous. And then the 80s kind of peaked out, and everybody's done with the hair. And they started going down the ladder. The record sales were dropping off, and they broke up.
And it become just a bunch of happy metal formula bands out there smiling and grinning and shaking their asses. There was definitely a disenfranchised audience who wanted that anger, wanted that frustration, and wanted that edge.
It's not a TV studio. Turn these lights out. It's a fucking rock concert.
At the dawn of the 90s, America was heading towards a recession, and young people faced an uncertain future. The unpolished sound of groups like Nirvana and Pearl Jam tapped into their cynicism and frustration, and hair metal's audience declined.
When we released the record Cherry Pie in the office of Columbia in New York, there was a huge poster of Cherry Pie, you know, and that was a big ego boost. And then when we were going to release the next record, I did the exact same trip to New York to talk with Donnie. And over his secretary's desk was a huge poster again, only this time it was Alice in Chains 3. And I was like, I think we slipped down the priority ladder here a little bit.
It was enough already. The way the image, the overt glam image, came to the fore so significantly 24 hours a day on MTV, it alienated the hardcore rock audience. So they looked for their joy somewhere else.
You listen to Kurt Cobain and you're like, wow, that's great. You listen to his songs and you're like, there's no bombs, there's no lasers, and they're coming to the shows and he's breaking everyone's heart. And you're going, oh, I have to go back to square one.
When the glam metal or pop metal bands faded away, the only bands that were left were the hardcore bands. Metallica, Seven, Megadeth, the only people to survive because they weren't going with any trend and they weren't allowing themselves to be compromised by the record companies. So their fans stood by them.
Others made attempts to appeal to the grunge audience. But by the early 90s, most of the metal bands that ruled the charts in the 80s were extinct.
When grunge became cool, it wasn't cool to be in any of the 80s bands. But if you weren't wearing flannel or had a goatee, I mean, you were not cool. I mean, you should be shot on sight.
Heavy metal had a wild ride in the 80s. From cult status to pop favorites, from speed metal to hair metal to thrash, metal bands took full advantage of a nation that seemed perpetually ready to party.
80s metal just means pure entertainment, just having a lot of fun, either playing it or watching.
The most important thing you can learn from 80s metal is it doesn't have to be serious. It doesn't have to be complaining all the time. It can be a celebration.
It was fun. I mean, I liked REM, but I mean, I don't think I would enjoy being a member of REM. I mean, I would love to have that integrity. I would love to have that critical acclaim. But I don't think they're having like big orgies and doing all kinds of drugs and doing blow off girl sticks and stuff.
A lot of great bands and great music came out of that era. I mean, we were truly living out our fantasy, and we brought that onto the stage, onto the scene, into the shows. We were young, we were partying, and it was
80s metal bands made music that was loud and fun, and we should be forever grateful